I lie in the hospital bed, machines beeping around me as I watch my family through the glass window, all dressed in party clothes, arguing with Dr. Martinez about visiting ours because they need to leave for Sophia's 25th birthday celebration at the Ritz-Carlton, the same birthday party they chose over my emergency surgery consultation 3 months ago when the doctors first found the tumor, and I realize with crystal clarity that even now, even as I'm dying, my adopted sister's happiness matters more to them than my life. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm spending my final moments watching them prioritize her celebration over my death, just like they prioritized her feelings over my health, her dreams over my achievements, her emotional needs over my literal survival for the past 15 years of our lives together. Dr. Martinez gestures emphatically at them through the glass, his face flushed with frustration as he explains something that makes my father, Richard Lawson, check his gold Rolex impatiently while my mother, Elena, smooths down her designer dress. And I can read their lips well enough to know they're asking if this will take long because the reservation at the Ritz is for 7 and they still need to pick up Sophia's custom cake from the French patisserie. And I want to laugh at the absurdity, except the breathing tube makes it impossible, so instead I just lie here dying while they plan party logistics outside my room like I'm already a ghost haunting their peripheral vision. The pattern started when Sophia first came to live with us 15 years ago, a traumatized 10-year-old orphan that my parents rescued from the system after her parents died in a car accident. And somehow, my family forgot that I existed too, forgot that I had needs and dreams and a body that was slowly betraying me. Because every milestone of mine coincided with something important for Sophia, my high school graduation where I was valedictorian fell on the same weekend as her first art show. My college acceptance to Harvard Business School was announced the day before her sweet 16, and now my life-saving surgery consultation happened to be scheduled on her birthday weekend again. It wasn't that my parents were cruel people, they just seemed to operate under the assumption that I was naturally resilient while Sophia was fragile, that I could handle disappointment while she would shatter, that my needs could wait while hers required immediate attention. And over the years, this dynamic calcified into an unspoken family law that Sophia's emotional well-being took precedence over everything else, including my physical survival. Every time I tried to assert my own needs, Mother would sigh deeply and explain that Sophia was going through a particularly difficult period and needed our complete emotional support, that as the biological daughter I had natural advantages that Sophia lacked, that showing favoritism would damage Sophia's already fragile sense of security, and somehow these explanations always made me feel selfish for wanting attention, guilty for having needs, ashamed of asking my own parents to prioritize me occasionally, so I learned to shrink myself smaller and smaller until I became the family ghost, present but invisible, helpful but unnoticed, dying but still less important than my adopted sister's birthday party. My father, Richard Lawson, built Lawson Pharmaceuticals from nothing, turning it into a billion-dollar empire that could have afforded the best medical care in the world for both his daughters, but somehow every family resource, emotional, financial, and temporal, flowed towards Sophia like she was a black hole of need, while I managed the company's youth outreach programs and charity galas, essentially running myself into the ground, trying to prove I was worthy of the same love they showered on her without question, never realizing that my constant stomach pains and fatigue weren't just stress from overwork, but signs of the aggressive cancer that would eventually kill me. The family money that could have saved my life was instead channeled into Sophia's art therapy, her private galleries, her emotional support specialists, her luxury apartment in the arts district, her monthly spa retreats to manage her anxiety, while I worked 80-hour weeks managing charitable foundations and pretending I didn't need anything from anyone, certainly not medical attention for what I assumed were just psychosomatic symptoms of being the less loved daughter. When I was 16, I won a national essay contest about pharmaceutical ethics, and the prize was a full scholarship to any Ivy League school plus a summer internship at Johns Hopkins. But the awards ceremony was the same night as Sophia's first gallery opening, so Dad sent his assistant to accept the award on my behalf, while the whole family attended Sophia's event, where she sold exactly 0 paintings but received endless emotional support for her brave artistic vulnerability. And that night, I realized that no achievement of mine would ever matter as much as Sophia's feelings, that I could cure cancer itself and they would still prioritize her paper cut. But instead of fighting this reality, I internalized it, convinced myself that loving my family meant accepting that I would always come second, that being the strong one meant never needing to be first. The stomach pains started 6 months before my death, sharp and relentless, like someone was twisting a knife through my abdomen every time I ate. But every time I mentioned them to Mother, she would sigh and say that Sophia was going through a difficult period with her gallery career and needed our full attention, that stress manifests in physical symptoms and I should try yoga or meditation, that Dr. Martinez was probably just going to prescribe antacids anyway, so why waste time with appointments when Sophia had back-to-back therapy sessions that required family support, and gradually I learned to hide the pain, to eat privately when the cramping got too severe, to take increasingly stronger over-the-counter medications that barely touched the agony radiating through my core like fire. When I finally collapsed during a board meeting, clutching my stomach as waves of pain crashed over me so intensely that I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only curl into a ball on the conference room floor while executives called for ambulances, Dad rushed me to the hospital in his Bentley, speeding through red lights and calling Dr. Martinez frantically, and for a moment I thought maybe this crisis would finally make them see me, finally make my health matter as much as Sophia's emotions. But the first thing he asked Dr. Martinez wasn't about my condition, but whether I would be recovered enough to attend Sophia's birthday celebration, because missing it would devastate her and she was so sensitive, so fragile, so much more important than his biological daughter who was literally dying in front of him. Dr. Martinez ran every test imaginable, his face growing more grave with each result, and when he finally sat down with my family to explain that I had stage 3 pancreatic cancer that had already metastasized to my liver, that we needed to start aggressive treatment immediately if there was any hope of survival, my first thought wasn't about my own mortality but about how this diagnosis would ruin Sophia's birthday party, how my cancer would steal focus from her celebration, how even my dying would somehow become about her emotional needs and my family's guilt over neglecting me for so long, and I felt almost apologetic for getting sick at such an inconvenient time. The oncology team scheduled multiple consultations and treatment planning sessions, but every appointment conflicted with something related to Sophia's birthday celebration, the venue planning meeting, the cake tasting, the dress fitting, the family photo shoot, the pre-party dinner, the actual party, the post-party brunch, and each time my parents would ask if we could reschedule my medical care around Sophia's social calendar, as if my cancer would politely wait for her birthday month to end before spreading further through my organs, and Dr. Martinez's professional composure began cracking as he explained repeatedly that cancer doesn't pause for parties, that every day we delayed treatment decreased my survival chances, that 25-year-old birthday celebrations happen every year, but I might not have another year if we kept postponing my care. But my parents had already committed to making this Sophia's most special birthday ever, had already invited 300 guests to the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, had already hired her favorite band and commissioned a custom jewelry collection and planned a surprise trip to Paris afterward, and the thought of canceling or even scaling back these festivities to accommodate my medical crisis seemed to physically pain them more than watching their biological daughter waste away from untreated cancer. So they kept asking Dr. Martinez if we could just wait one more week, just until after the party, just until Sophia's emotional state was stable enough to handle the stress of my illness. Dr. Martinez schedules my emergency surgery for the day after Sophia's birthday, explaining that every day we delay increases the metastasis risk exponentially, that the tumor is pressing against vital organs and could cause fatal complications at any moment. But Dad immediately objects because the whole family needs to be present for Sophia's big day since she's been planning this celebration for months, and my surgery can wait one more day, can't it? Surely 24 hours won't make the difference between life and death. And I watch helplessly as my own father negotiates with my oncologist about postponing my cancer treatment so we don't inconvenience my adopted sister's party schedule, bargaining with my life like it's a business deal where my survival is less valuable than Sophia's happiness. I want to scream that I'm 25 too, that this should be a milestone year for both of us, that my birthday was 6 months ago and they forgot it entirely because Sophia was stressed about a gallery rejection. But the words stick in my throat because even now, even facing death, I can't bring myself to compete with her for their attention. Can't bear to see the disappointment in their eyes if I dare to suggest that my life might matter as much as her feelings, and I realize that if I die, they'll probably schedule my funeral around her convenience too. Maybe wait until after her Paris trip so the grief doesn't ruin her vacation photos. The night before the party, Sophia visits my hospital room wearing the custom Valentino dress Dad bought for her celebration, and she perches on the edge of my bed like a delicate bird, telling me how grateful she is that I'm being so understanding about the surgery timing, how much it means to her that I'm putting her happiness first, even now, how this is exactly why she loves me so much, because I always sacrifice for her without complaint, because I never make her feel guilty for needing more support, because I'm the strong one who can handle anything while she's too fragile for disappointment. And as she speaks, I realize she genuinely believes that my deathbed sacrifice is just another example of my natural selflessness, rather than a horrific indictment of our family's priorities. She kisses my forehead and promises to save me a piece of cake from the party, tells me she'll wear the diamond earrings I gave her for Christmas so I'll be with her in spirit. And after she leaves, I lie in the dark listening to the machines keeping me alive and thinking about how even my death is being choreographed around her emotional needs, how my last conscious acts will be pretending that her birthday matters more than my survival because admitting otherwise would make her feel bad. And I wonder if this is what unconditional love actually looks like, the complete erasure of your own needs in service of someone else's happiness, the systematic destruction of your own worth until you become nothing more than a supporting character in someone else's story. The machines flatline as I watch my family leave for Sophia's party, and the last thing I see is Dad checking his watch to make sure they're not late for the 7 o'clock reservation, not bothering to look back at his daughter's body as the monitors scream their electronic death song, and then everything goes dark until suddenly I'm gasping awake in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows, and I know with absolute certainty that I'm 18 years old again, that it's exactly 7 years before my death, and this time I'm going to choose myself. I sit up in bed and immediately notice the Harvard Business School acceptance letter on my nightstand, the same letter that got buried under news of Sophia's art scholarship 7 years ago, and I remember this day perfectly. In 3 hours, Sophia will announce that she got into the prestigious Whitmore Art Institute and needs the family's complete emotional and financial support to pursue her dreams, and Dad will immediately start planning how to restructure the company's charitable giving to support emerging artists, completely forgetting that his own daughter just got accepted to one of the world's top business schools. But this time, I'm not going to let my achievements be overshadowed by her manufactured crises. The acceptance letter feels different in my hands now, heavier with the weight of what I know it represents, not just admission to an elite university, but the first step toward building the kind of independent life that might have saved me in my previous timeline, the foundation for financial and emotional autonomy that could protect me from my family's toxic dynamics. And as I trace the Harvard seal with my finger, I make a silent promise that this letter will not get coffee spilled on it during one of Sophia's convenient emotional breakdowns, will not become a footnote in the story of her artistic journey, will not disappear into the background noise of her endless need for validation and support. I know exactly what happens next in the original timeline. Sophia will come to my room in tears about not feeling worthy of the scholarship. I'll comfort her and offer to help her prepare for the interview. She'll accidentally spill coffee on my Harvard letter during our bonding session, and by the time we clean it up, the conversation will have shifted entirely to her needs and fears. With my acceptance becoming a footnote in the story of her artistic journey, but armed with 7 years of hindsight and the bitter knowledge of how this favoritism eventually kills me, I'm going to handle things very differently this time around. The knowledge feels like a superpower coursing through my veins, every detail of the next 7 years crystal clear in my mind, which investments will pay off, which relationships matter, which medical symptoms to watch for, which family dynamics to refuse, which boundaries to establish, which people actually care about me versus those who see me as a convenient source of emotional labor, and, most importantly, exactly when my body will start betraying me and how to catch the cancer before it spreads beyond surgical intervention, before my family's neglect becomes a literal death sentence. When Sophia appears at my door exactly on schedule, tears streaming down her face as she clutches her acceptance letter like it's a suicide note instead of an incredible opportunity, I don't immediately open my arms for comfort like I did before. Instead, I stay seated at my desk, organizing my Harvard paperwork and say calmly, "Congratulations on Whitmore. I heard they only accept 5 students per year." and I watch her face change from practiced vulnerability to genuine confusion because she expected me to drop everything and focus on her emotional needs. But I continue sorting my documents while she stands there off balance, clearly unprepared for a sister who doesn't automatically prioritize her feelings over everything else. Her script is exactly the same as I remember. She starts explaining how she doesn't deserve this opportunity, how she's not talented enough compared to the other applicants, how the pressure of everyone's expectations is crushing her delicate artistic spirit, how she needs someone to help her prepare for the interview because she's too fragile to handle it alone. But instead of immediately offering my services like a trained emotional support animal, I listen politely while continuing to organize my college application materials, occasionally making supportive noises but refusing to drop my own priorities to manage her manufactured crisis. When she starts her rehearsed speech about not feeling worthy and needing family support, I interrupt gently but firmly, saying, "That's something you should discuss with Mom and Dad. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to help." And I turn back to my college planning, effectively forcing her to leave my room without accomplishing her goal of making this day about her crisis instead of my achievement. And for the first time in 15 years, my Harvard acceptance letter remains clean and unspilled upon, pristine evidence that I matter too, that my accomplishments deserve protection from her emotional chaos, that choosing myself over her comfort doesn't make me a bad sister, just a sister with boundaries. She hovers in my doorway for a moment, clearly expecting me to crack under the pressure of her disappointed silence, to apologize for being selfish and immediately offer to help her process her feelings about the scholarship, but I keep my attention focused on my Harvard paperwork, and eventually she has no choice but to leave without getting the emotional caretaking she came for, and I feel a small thrill of victory at this tiny but significant shift in our dynamic, this first successful boundary that protects my space and priorities from her endless appetite for attention and support. For the first time in either of my lives, I allow myself to feel pure excitement about Harvard without guilt, without the need to minimize my achievement to make room for someone else's insecurities, without immediately pivoting to worry about how my success might affect Sophia's emotional state. And as I spread the acceptance materials across my desk, I realize that this is what self-advocacy feels like. Not cruel or selfish, like I'd been taught to believe, but actually quite natural and healthy, like finally allowing myself to breathe after holding my breath for 18 years. At dinner, Dad starts his predictable speech about restructuring our charitable foundation to support emerging artists, clearly having already spoken with Sophia about her needs during the hour since she left my room. And instead of sitting quietly while they plan my trust fund around her career like I did before, I speak up clearly and say, "That sounds wonderful for Sophia, and I'm sure Harvard Business School will give me excellent experience in foundation management when I take over those operations next year," effectively inserting myself into the conversation and making it impossible for them to ignore my role in the family business. And I watch Dad's face register surprise that his previously compliant daughter has opinions about her own future, that the daughter he took for granted actually has plans and ambitions beyond serving as Sophia's emotional support system. The silence that follows my declaration stretches uncomfortably as my parents process this unexpected assertion of agency, this unprecedented claim on family resources and business operations, and I can see them struggling to reconcile their image of me as the naturally selfless daughter with this new version who stakes territorial claims and expects to be included in strategic planning, but I maintain calm eye contact and wait for them to respond, refusing to fill the awkward pause with apologies or backtracking like the old me would have done automatically. When Mother objects that Sophia needs more emotional support during this transition, that restructuring the foundation around emerging artists would provide her with the security she needs to thrive creatively, I smile warmly and say, "Absolutely, which is why I think it's perfect that you and Dad can focus completely on helping her while I handle my own college preparations independently." And suddenly they can't argue with my self-sufficiency without admitting they've been treating me like I don't need support, and for the first time in our family dynamic, my independence becomes a strength rather than a reason to ignore me further, a strategic advantage rather than evidence that I require less care than my adopted sister. Dad clears his throat and asks tentatively about my Harvard plans, and I realize this might be the first time in years that he's shown genuine curiosity about my academic goals, rather than just checking to make sure my achievements won't interfere with Sophia's emotional needs. and I take the opportunity to outline my intention to pursue both the MBA and JD programs, to specialize in pharmaceutical law and ethical business practices, to position myself as his successor in running the family company, and I watch his businessman's brain start calculating the value of having a Harvard-educated lawyer MBA as his heir apparent instead of an emotionally fragile artist who needs constant financial support. Sophia picks at her food silently during this conversation, clearly unused to not being the center of attention during family discussions, unused to having to compete for airtime with my actual opinions and plans, and I feel a small surge of satisfaction at her discomfort because this is what equality feels like. Not special treatment for the traumatized orphan versus neglect for the biological daughter, but two sisters with different strengths and goals receiving proportional support and attention. And if she doesn't like sharing the spotlight, then maybe she'll understand how I felt for the past 15 years of being systematically overshadowed. The next week, instead of helping Sophia prepare for her Whitmore interview like I did in my past life, I reach out to Marcus Chen, the son of our family's business partner, who I remembered was always kind to me at company events, but whom I never appreciated because I was too busy managing Sophia's social anxiety. And when I call him about potentially collaborating on a business project for my Harvard application portfolio, his enthusiasm reminds me that there were always people in my life who valued me for myself. I just never noticed because I was too focused on earning my family's approval instead of building relationships with people who already saw my worth. Marcus picks me up in his Tesla for our coffee meeting, and as we discuss potential ventures in pharmaceutical innovation, particularly around making cancer treatments more accessible to underserved populations, I realize that he's not just being polite, he genuinely respects my business acumen and treats me like an equal partner rather than someone's sister or daughter. And when he mentions that he's been hoping to work with me for years, but never wanted to interfere with my family responsibilities, I understand that my devotion to Sophia didn't just cost me my parents' attention, it also prevented me from building relationships with people who actually valued me, who saw my potential and wanted to collaborate rather than just extract emotional labor. Our business plan focuses on developing patent-sharing agreements that would allow generic manufacturers to produce cancer medications at cost for patients below certain income thresholds, essentially creating a sustainable model for pharmaceutical philanthropy that doesn't rely on charity but on innovative legal structures. And as we work through the details, I feel my mind coming alive in ways it never did when I was managing Sophia's emotional crises, because this is intellectual stimulation rather than emotional drain, partnership rather than caretaking, building something meaningful rather than just preventing someone else's breakdown. Marcus listens to my ideas about using blockchain technology to track medication distribution and ensure accountability in the supply chain, and instead of looking overwhelmed or suggesting I simplify my concepts, he builds on them with his own insights about manufacturing, logistics, and international regulatory frameworks, and I realize this is what collaboration with an intellectual equal feels like, not having to shrink my ambitions to make someone else comfortable, not having to pretend my capabilities are less than they are to avoid threatening someone's fragile ego, but actually being challenged to think bigger and better and more creatively than I could alone. 3 weeks later, Sophia's Whitmore interview goes disastrously because she never learned to handle pressure without me managing her anxiety, coaching her through practice sessions, and essentially doing half the emotional labor of her artistic career, and she comes home in tears expecting the full family crisis response. But instead of dropping everything to comfort her like before, I'm in the library video calling with Harvard's admissions office about my summer internship program, discussing my pharmaceutical philanthropy proposal with the dean of the business school, and when she interrupts my call to demand emotional support, I politely but firmly say, "I'm in an important meeting, please ask Mom," and continue my conversation, leaving her standing there, realizing that her emotional emergencies no longer automatically override my priorities. The admissions dean is impressed by the scope and sophistication of my business plan, particularly the way Marcus and I have addressed both the economic and ethical implications of pharmaceutical accessibility, and she mentions that Harvard has been looking for student entrepreneurs who can bridge the gap between profit motives and social responsibility. And as we discuss potential funding sources and implementation strategies, I feel the excitement of intellectual recognition, of being valued for my mind rather than my willingness to sacrifice for others. And I realize that this is what it feels like to be seen for who I actually am, rather than who my family needs me to be. The next morning at breakfast, Sophia complains tearfully that I've become selfish and unsupportive, that I used to care about her feelings, and now I act like my own goals matter more than her emotional needs, clearly expecting mom and dad to take her side and lecture me about family loyalty. But I respond calmly, I think supporting you means believing you're capable of handling challenges independently, just like I am. And suddenly her complaint makes her sound childish while I sound mature, and I watch Dad's expression shift as he realizes that maybe his adopted daughter's constant need for rescue isn't actually healthy for anyone involved, that maybe treating her like she's too fragile for normal disappointments has prevented her from developing resilience. Mother starts to object that Sophia has special emotional needs due to her traumatic childhood, but I interrupt gently, and I have special intellectual needs due to my academic abilities, but I've learned to meet those independently instead of expecting constant family intervention, and the parallel forces them to confront the double standard they've maintained for years, excusing Sophia's dependence while taking my independence for granted, providing her with unlimited emotional support while expecting me to be naturally self-sufficient, investing in her fragility while ignoring my capabilities. And for the first time, I see doubt in their eyes about whether their approach has been fair or even helpful. Dad asks what I mean by intellectual needs, and I explain that I've been developing advanced business concepts and legal frameworks without family input because I learned early that my academic achievements were less important than Sophia's emotional crises, that I stopped sharing my intellectual excitement because it always got overshadowed by her need for validation, that I built an independent academic life because depending on family support meant having my needs perpetually deprioritized, and I watched them realize that their well-intentioned favoritism didn't just harm me, it also deprived them of the opportunity to nurture a daughter who could have been a genuine intellectual partner in business. Successor. The conversation shifts as Dad starts asking serious questions about my Harvard plans, about the pharmaceutical philanthropy project, about my timeline for joining the family business, and I realize he's beginning to see me as a strategic asset, rather than just the stable daughter who doesn't require attention, beginning to understand that my academic achievements represent actual value for the family company, rather than just personal accomplishments that don't affect anyone else. And this recognition feels like a small victory against years of being treated like my capabilities didn't matter because I wasn't falling apart dramatically enough to demand intervention. 6 months into this new timeline, I remember that my stomach pains started around this time in my previous life, so instead of ignoring early symptoms and pushing through like before, I schedule a comprehensive medical exam and tell Dr. Martinez about my family history concerns, explaining that I want to be proactive about monitoring my health because I've learned that early detection is crucial for serious conditions. And when the initial tests show some irregularities that require further investigation, I don't minimize the importance or let family drama distract from follow-up appointments, because this time I understand that my life is literally at stake, and no amount of Sophia's emotional needs justifies risking my health. Dr. Martinez is pleased by my proactive approach and explains that the genetic screening reveals several markers that indicate elevated cancer risk, particularly for pancreatic and liver cancers, which means regular monitoring could catch any developments in the earliest stages when treatment is most effective. And as he outlines the surveillance protocol, I feel a mixture of vindication and terror, vindication that my instincts about needing medical attention were correct, terror at how close I came to dying from my family's medical neglect, but also determination that this time I will advocate for myself regardless of who finds it inconvenient. The first round of tests shows cellular changes that aren't quite precancerous, but aren't completely normal either, essentially catching my body at the exact moment when intervention could prevent the aggressive cancer that killed me in my previous life, and Dr. Martinez recommends a minor surgical procedure to remove the problematic tissue before it can develop into malignancy, a simple outpatient surgery that would be preventive rather than curative, proactive rather than desperate, the difference between choosing to address a problem versus being forced to fight for survival. When the test results require additional monitoring, and Dad suggests postponing because Sophia is stressed about her rejection from Whitmore and needs family support during this difficult period, I look him directly in the eye and say, "Dad, I need you to understand that my medical care is not negotiable, and if you can't support that, I'll handle it myself through my trust fund. And something about my calm certainty shocks him into really seeing me for the first time, realizing that his daughter has grown into someone who values herself enough to demand proper care, someone who won't sacrifice her health for anyone else's comfort, someone who has learned that self-preservation isn't selfish but necessary. And he immediately apologizes and clears his schedule to drive me to every appointment personally. The surgery is scheduled for the following week, and as I prepare for the procedure, I feel a strange mixture of emotions. Grief for the woman I was in my previous life who died because she never learned to prioritize her own needs. Anger at a family system that made medical neglect seem normal, but also hope that this time I can save not just my own life but potentially break the cycle of dysfunction that was slowly killing all of us. That perhaps by refusing to enable Sophia's dependence, I can force her to develop the resilience she actually needs. That by demanding appropriate medical care, I can teach my parents that love means attention to all their children's needs, not just the most dramatically expressed ones. The early detection program catches the precancerous cells before they develop into the aggressive tumor that killed me, and as I sit in recovery after the minor surgical procedure that saves my life, surrounded by flowers from Marcus and cards from Harvard classmates I haven't even met yet, I post a photo on social media of myself with a small bandage and a genuine smile, captioned, "Celebrating successful preventive care. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is prioritizing your health." And for the first time in either of my lives, I feel proud of choosing myself over everyone else's comfort, proud of the woman I'm becoming rather than the people pleaser I used to be. Marcus visits me during recovery with a bouquet of my favorite flowers and a business magazine featuring an article about young entrepreneurs in healthcare innovation. And when he asks how I knew to get the early screening that caught the cellular changes, I tell him simply that I've learned to listen to my body and advocate for my needs instead of assuming other people's problems are more important than my own health, and he nods approvingly and says, "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that will make me an excellent business partner." And I realize that choosing myself hasn't cost me authentic relationships. It's actually made space for better ones. 2 years later, I'm graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Business School with a joint MBA, JD that positions me perfectly to take over Lawson Pharmaceuticals' legal and strategic operations. And as I walk across the stage to receive my diploma, I see Marcus in the audience cheering louder than my own family, and I realize that the people who truly matter have been supporting my success all along, while the family members who used to dominate my emotional landscape are now just faces in the crowd. Important but no longer central to my sense of self-worth, no longer the arbiters of whether my achievements have value or meaning. My parents are there too, of course, sitting with Sophia, who has finally gotten into a decent art program after learning to handle rejection and pressure independently, and I can see genuine pride in Dad's eyes as he watches me accept the academic honors that represent not just personal achievement but strategic preparation for leading the family business into its next phase of growth. And Mother dabs at tears that seem more authentic than the performative emotion she used to display during Sophia's crises. And I feel a cautious optimism that maybe our family relationships can be rebuilt on healthier foundations now that I've established myself as someone whose needs matter equally. The pharmaceutical philanthropy project that Marcus and I developed has been featured in 3 business journals and caught the attention of international healthcare organizations interested in implementing our patent-sharing model. And as I accept the diploma that represents years of intellectual growth and strategic thinking, I think about how different this success feels from the achievements I earned in my previous life, not desperate attempts to prove my worth to people who weren't paying attention, but genuine accomplishments that build toward a life I actually want to live, relationships I actually enjoy, goals that serve my own values rather than other people's expectations. Marcus proposes the week after graduation, not with a dramatic public display, but with a quiet confidence that mirrors our entire relationship, sitting in the library where we first planned our business venture and saying simply, "I want to build an empire with you, not just a marriage." And as I say yes, I think about how different this feels from the desperate need for approval that characterized my previous life, how love feels so much better when it comes from someone who has always seen your worth, rather than someone you have to convince to value you. how partnership means building something together rather than one person constantly sacrificing for the other's emotional needs. The engagement ring is beautiful but not ostentatious, a classic solitaire that reflects Marcus's understanding that I prefer substance over flash, meaning over spectacle, and as I look at it sparkling in the library light where we spent so many hours developing the business plan that launched our careers, I realize this symbol represents not just romantic commitment but intellectual partnership, mutual respect, shared ambitions, the kind of equal relationship I never thought possible when I was trained to believe that love meant selfless sacrifice and endless emotional caretaking. At our engagement party, Sophia approaches me hesitantly and says, "I never realized how much you gave up for me until you stopped doing it," and for the first time, I see genuine remorse in her eyes rather than manipulative tears. Real recognition of the costs of our previous dynamic rather than just disappointment that her emotional support system became unavailable. And I respond honestly, I needed to learn to value myself before I could have healthy relationships with anyone. And somehow this truth creates space for a real friendship between us, built on mutual respect rather than codependency, proving that the best way to love someone is sometimes to stop sacrificing yourself for them. She tells me that the Whitmore rejection forced her to confront her own learned helplessness, to develop the resilience she should have been building all along, and that while the adjustment was painful at first, she's ultimately grateful for the opportunity to become a more capable and independent person. And I realized that my boundary setting didn't just save my own life, it also gave her the chance to grow into someone stronger than the fragile victim role our family had trapped her in, someone capable of handling disappointment and pressure without requiring constant intervention. Dad pulls me aside during the party to apologize for the years of medical neglect, for prioritizing Sophia's emotional needs over my physical health, for taking my resilience for granted while treating her fragility as more urgent and important. And when he asks how he can make amends, I tell him simply that treating both his daughters as equally deserving of attention and care would be the best gift he could give us, that families function better when needs are balanced rather than when one person's requirements eclipse everyone else's, and I watch him nod thoughtfully as he begins to understand that favoritism hurts everyone involved, even the favored child. Mother joins us and admits that she let her protective instincts toward Sophia override her judgment about fairness, that she was so focused on compensating for Sophia's early trauma that she forgot I had my own needs for nurturing and support, that she mistook my competence for invulnerability and nearly cost me my life through medical neglect. And as she apologizes, I feel the old resentment beginning to dissolve, replaced by cautious hope that we can build new family dynamics based on equality and mutual care rather than the toxic favoritism that nearly destroyed us all. The evening ends with Marcus and me standing on the terrace overlooking the city, where we'll build our pharmaceutical empire, where we'll implement the accessibility programs we designed at Harvard, where we'll prove that business success and social responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. And as I look out at the lights sparkling below us, I think about the woman I was in my previous life, dying alone in a hospital room while her family attended a birthday party, sacrificing everything for people who took her sacrifice for granted, never learning that self-preservation and self-advocacy aren't selfish but necessary for any kind of authentic love or meaningful success. This time, I celebrated my recovery surrounded by people who chose to be there, people who value my health and happiness as much as I've learned to value it myself, people who see my success as something worth celebrating rather than something that threatens their own emotional needs. And as Marcus takes my hand and we plan our future together, business partners and life partners, intellectual equals and emotional supporters, two people who choose each other from strength rather than neediness, I know that sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is teaching them that you're worth loving properly, that your needs matter too, that real families find ways to care for everyone instead of sacrificing some members for others, and that the only way to build a life worth living is to first believe that your life has value worth protecting.